Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Since in 2012, Voyager 1 left our solar system, the first time any human object made that 11 billion mile trip. In 2015, the New Horizons probe beamed back the most detailed pictures and data on Pluto to date. And a year later, the Juno space probe did the same thing for Jupiter, giving us stunning new images and deeper understanding of the gas giant. In 2018, NASA successfully landed the InSight probe on Mars, tasked with looking at the interior of the red planet. And just days into the new year, China's space agency landed its own probe on the little examined dark side of the moon. Joining me now, NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine, who directs the agency, grabbing so many headlines lately. Administrator Bridenstine, good to see you. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
We are space geeks on this show, and there's a lot of stuff I want to talk to you about space, but I want to talk about something else first. NASA is just one of several government agencies that is sounding the alarm louder and more frequently now on climate change. NASA's Earth Sciences program is particularly good at measuring and tracking how the world is warming. We really rely on groups like NASA to figure this out and bring it to the fore and treat it, very seriously. Have you been able to speak to the president about this and about the steps that we sort of need to think about to mitigate the effects of climate change?
So yes, the president and I, we've had conversations about everything related to NASA, but in this particular case, NASA, we are sensing the Earth in every part of the electromagnetic spectrum, and then we're making all of that data available to the public, data and information. That's what NASA does. Yep. Now, I want to be clear, because this is something important for me as the NASA administrator to make people aware of. NASA does not get involved in making policy prescriptions. What we do is we do science and exploration, discovery with our assets to study the data, and we make everything available to the public so that other people, policymakers, can make decisions. But that's really not what NASA does. But we will continue absolutely to study the Earth. It's important to note also that the president's budget request for the Earth Science Division of NASA has been very, very strong. He is for studying the Earth. It's also important to note that just last week, NASA got its largest Earth science budget in its history, and that's with strong bipartisan support. So it's really a good news story from this budget experience.
All right, so you think that NASA's commitment to studying Earth sciences is going to be something that is going to stay steady? The funding for it will remain?
I think absolutely. I see strong bipartisan support for it, and this budget cycle demonstrated it in a very good way.
All right, let's talk about commercial space first of all. You have been in your legislative days. You have been a strong supporter of the commercialization of space and understanding the role NASA would have and commercial space. Where do you think we are in that continuum?
It's a great question. So what we're interested in is anywhere there is a robust commercial marketplace, NASA wants to be one customer of many customers. Low Earth orbit is a good example. And we want to have multiple providers that are competing on cost and innovation. In other words, this will drive down our cost for access to space and increase access to space. And so right now we are resupplying the International Space Station with what we call commercial resupply. And we have, this year, we're going to be launching American rockets with American astronauts from American soil with what we call commercial crew to send our astronauts to the International Space Station. When we do this, then we can use the taxpayer resources to do things for which there is no commercial marketplace yet. For example, the moon and studying Mars and studying Jupiter and Pluto, as you identified.
Which is a great use of NASA. Let things that commercial enterprises do, let them handle that, and NASA can sort of take us to the next frontier. Let's talk about Mars then. Landing the InSight probe on Mars was a big moment for everyone at NASA. What are you learning from InSight, and how is it laying the groundwork for the possibility of a human mission to Mars?
So, wonderful question. So what we're trying to understand is the history of Mars and its geology with InSight. So between the InSight lander and the Mars Opportunity rover and the Curiosity rover, which is currently operating on the surface of Mars, we know a whole lot about Mars that we didn't know even 10 or 15 years ago. Number one, Mars used to have a strong magnetosphere that protected it from radiation in deep space, the radiation that comes from the sun. Because it had that, Mars had an ocean in its northern hemisphere. In fact, 2/3 of the northern hemisphere of Mars was covered in an ocean, and it had a thick atmosphere. In other words, Mars was habitable. I'm not saying it was inhabited, but it was habitable. As of right now, because of recent discoveries on Mars, we now know that there are complex organic compounds on the surface of Mars. That doesn't guarantee that there's life, but the building blocks for life are on Mars, and those building blocks do not exist on the moon. Of course, they exist on Earth, and they exist on Mars. So we're learning more about whether or not there either is or was at one time life on Mars. But it's not just about that. We now know that there's liquid water 12 kilometers under the surface of Mars. Liquid water. Anywhere there's liquid water on Earth, there's life. So what we're trying to discover is life on a planet that's not our own. But here's the other thing that I think is critically important for everybody to know. Over 1 billion years ago, Mars lost its matter. It lost its ocean. It lost its atmosphere. And so by studying Mars, we can get insight into how Earth's atmosphere is changing and ultimately make, I think, better determinations as to the direction Earth is going by studying the history of Mars.
Do you see, is there a timeline that you guys talk about over at NASA about when we might see a human mission to Mars?
Yes, we're looking to target the mid-2030s. There's a lot to be done between now and then, but what we're doing is we're going to the moon under the President's Space Policy Directive 1. We're going to the moon, and what he said is we're going to go sustainably. In other words, we're not going to go to leave flags and footprints and not go back for another 50 years, but we're going to take international partners and we're going to take commercial partners. We're going to go sustainably with humans and landers and rovers and robots. Ultimately, we're going to retire risk, prove technology and capability, and as much as possible develop the technologies that can be reusable at Mars. The difference between the moon and Mars is that the moon is a 3-day journey home. When we go to Mars, there's only once out of every 26 months when the Earth and Mars are on the same side of the sun. So when we go to Mars, we're going to have to go to stay for at least a period of 2 years. So between now and then, we have to prove all these technologies at the moon, and we're doing it with a coalition of international partners that are joining us in this effort.
And you're talking, I mean, look, we've got at the X Prize, they've got a lunar project going. Google's got lunar work going. You've talked about permanent moon bases, right? A reusable Earth to moon infrastructure.
That's right.
What do we get out of that? I mean, one of the exciting things about space is all the stuff that happens that we end up using in our daily lives that we don't think about. Are we talking about getting resources from the moon that we can use on Earth?
Absolutely. So in 2009, NASA made a discovery that there's hundreds of billions of tons of water ice on the surface of the moon. Water ice represents air to breathe, oxygen. It also represents, hydrogen and oxygen, water to drink for life support, and it represents rocket fuel. So hydrogen and oxygen, when water is cracked into hydrogen and oxygen, put into cryogenic form, that's the same rocket fuel that powered the space shuttles. It's the same rocket fuel that will power the Space Launch System, the largest rocket system ever built that is under development at NASA right now, looking for a first launch in the year 2020. So we have a lot under development right now to go back to the moon sustainably with international and commercial partners.
It is Tuesday, the 19th of February of 2019, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam, and our daily special is Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays, just a little scant dash of hot Hungarian smoked paprika. Will make all the difference in the world. You can use the Spanish kind. It is perfectly fine. In fact, it is just equally as good as the Hungarian smoked hot paprika. So do either one, whatever you have in your shelf. Most of us have the Hungarian, but, Well, we're, now? Day 5 of the national emergency, and I'm getting a little worried that my sparkling water shipment might not be coming in. Do I get a sparkling water shipment? No, I go to the store and buy it, but I like the way that it rolls off the tongue, a sparkling water shipment. Yeah, life is hard, and it's so hard even for the President of the United States. The only respite he has from all the stress is to play golf continually. So good for him. He's found a space in which he can get, balance. And we need our leaders to be balanced, don't we? Boy, the 25th Amendment, a lot of people learning about that. It used to be the First Amendment, and then the Fifth Amendment. I'm not going to incriminate myself. Now it's the 25th Amendment. It's like, jeez, this isn't for Woodrow Wilson anymore, now is it? And we should remember, when the 25th Amendment was first put on the books, it's important to remember that they were a lot closer to Woodrow Wilson than we are to them right now. Yeah, didn't want to go through that again. Woodrow Wilson having a stroke for the better part of a year. His wife ran the government. Now, that could be good or bad. But in the constitutional line of succession of the United States, that was a little, shall we say, wrong. So, 25th Amendment it is, and this is more than just a stroke. McCabe, who was summarily fired, and right before his pension was going to kick in, because that's the way a demagogue thug deals with government when put in power. Every single one of top law enforcement has been summarily displaced or on their way out. Rosenstein leaves in March. We got Barr in there now. Is Barr going to be Bork? It's close. Okay? You got a couple of the consonants there, don't you? Jeez. We don't know. He could be an institutionalist. Apparently Mueller and he have been more than just professional acquaintances. They've gone to each other's daughters' weddings and, close enough for that. Who's going to keep who in line? Especially when what Trump calls treason, the rest of law enforcement at the time said, we have a traitor in our midst that just got elected president with the help of a hostile foreign power. We don't even have to name them a hostile foreign power. They've named us as the target of their hostile actions. And to not do anything would be unpatriotic, now wouldn't it? Well, what's on the rest of the menu? At the top, of course, that was Jim Bridenstine. I've got to tell you, he's been a climate change denier before he became NASA administrator. Now he sees the science, but he can't quite come out and say publicly, oh, yeah, there's climate change. All he can do is say, well, we got the science. Can't give it to Trump because he'll go off. So we're just going to disseminate it to the public, and that way you'll know. We don't have much time now, do we? And Mars looks pretty good because it's even though Mars is irradiated to the extent that really hardly any organisms can survive on the surface of the planet. Apparently, NASA thinks that's a good place to go compared to here. Maybe it's because of the billions and trillions of microscopic brown people who are infecting our atmosphere. Maybe. I don't know. Well, Mars is interesting, but it's science. It's not a destination for a colony. Let's be clear. Well, on the rest of the menu in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, he's still facing felony criminal charges for securities violations. But his wife was just newly elected to the state Senate, and her first act is to proffer a bill that will give his office more power over the securities industry. Well, that's one way to wriggle out of it now, isn't it? As Trump finds ways to steal money from the military to pay for his vanity wall, the Air Force is pushing Congress for a military housing tenant Bill of Rights. The Air Force, that socialist organization, and they are. I got to tell you, they are. They're pushing for a tenant Bill of Rights. Man, the military is turned into socialists. And a scathing British parliamentary report branded Facebook as digital gangsters for knowingly violating data privacy and competition laws. Too big to fail. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where the U.S. auto industry implored Trump against imposing steep tariffs on imported cars and auto parts. He's going to do it anyway because Beamers are a national security threat. Everybody knows that. And the Nicaraguan farmer who protested Daniel Ortega last year gets a 216-year prison sentence. Don't you dare say anything against that president. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. At the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, to the rightish of the page is the chat room link, monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the leftish of the chat room link at the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com is the contribute button. And if you could please, all kidding aside, become a recurring Patreon to Netroots Radio, your recurring contribution pays our bills. It puts a big dent in it, and now we have equipment problems that we need to address, and that costs money. Almost to the extent that I think we may be buying some major equipment. So I'm sorry that I have to say this, but we need your help. So thank you for your generosity. We are truly unable to do this without you. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, you can do so at Netroots Radio. Thank you, Tom, for taking care of that. And you can follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I also post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's about 10 minutes before showtime. You can follow the show on Twitter at CookbookWest. And podcasts can be found by way of Stitcher, Spreaker, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever podcasts can be found. Lisa Needham of Share Blue Media brings us this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. Texas State Senator Angela Paxton, a Republican, who just happens to be the wife of the sitting AG. Oh, that's short for Attorney General, you know. And his name just happens to be Ken Paxton. Well, Angela here has introduced a bill to increase the power of her husband's office in a way that uniquely benefits her husband. And I would think by extension it would benefit her too. Well, back in July of 2015, while he was already the sitting Attorney General of Texas, Paxton was indicted on 3 separate securities fraud felonies. One of those was a charge for acting as an investment advisor when he wasn't registered. Oh, just like a process crime. Paxton was soliciting clients and taking a commission for those clients, but he'd never registered to do so with the state securities board because he was AG, and why should he? When people found out, they'd probably make him stop, and he can't have that. There's money to be made. Paxton has already faced civil consequences, having been disciplined by the Texas State Securities Board, and he's still awaiting his criminal trial, but has managed to get the trial pushed back several times because it would be prejudicial to his election as the state attorney general, the top cop. The last trial date was for December of 2017, but that date came and went, and it's already 2019. Jeez. And Paxton made it through the 2018 election while still under indictment, because that's a prerequisite for running as a repug in Texas. Paxton's wife is now a sitting state senator, having just gotten elected in 2018, and one of her very first efforts upon taking office was to introduce a bill that expands the power of the Attorney General to allow people to work as investment advisors without having to register with the State Securities Board. Why, of course, take it out of the hands of the experts, the civil servants who are tasked because of their abilities and their expertise in being able to determine whether one is, or should be allowed to trade securities. Like one of those things about letting your clients know that you're not stealing their money. That's the other thing she wants to get rid of. What? Tell a client that you're there and you're going to steal their money whether they win or lose? Come on, we can't tell them that. We're grifters. M.B. Pell and Deborah Nelson of Reuters brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Aiming to grant military families far greater say to challenge hazardous housing, the U.S. Air Force told Reuters yesterday, that would be Monday, it will push Congress to enact a tenant bill of rights, allowing families the power to withhold rent or break leases to escape unsafe conditions. What has become of our military? I thought these people were supposed to suck it up and let the President of the United States steal everything they got because he loves them so. The proposed measure, outlined in an interview at the Pentagon by Secretary of the Air Force Heather Wilson and Chief of Staff David L. Goldfein, follows complaints from military families who say they are often powerless to challenge private industry landlords when they encounter dangerous mold, lead paint, and vermin infestations. Well, look, that's the long history of military contractors. Get the money, and if a few troops die, hey, that's written into the contract. You don't think they're putting 25% overage on because of equipment failures now, do you? Clearly, there are areas where we have issues, Goldfein said. You would think. And then added Secretary Wilson, that could put a little more leverage into the hands of the renters. Well, you would hope. Now, the Air Force push adds to a drumbeat of reforms to emerge in recent weeks following a Reuters series, Ambushed at Home, that documented shoddy housing conditions at bases nationwide and described how military families are empowered with fewer rights than civilian tenants. Because they're the military, you got to kick them. You go on stage and tell everybody how much you love them. You'll salute them at the parade. But when it comes down to their actual housing, are you kidding me? There's a buck to be made. And the best buck is being a war profiteer and sticking it to the troops. There's a long history of it. It's the patriotic thing to do, no matter what country you're in. Now, the military action plans follow a Senate Armed Services Committee hearing this month in which members of Congress sharply question private industry and their landlords of the private industry and Defense Department leaders over conditions at U.S. bases. Why are there private industry on U.S. bases providing housing? Shouldn't that be the military's purview? Wilson said the Air Force is also considering working with Congress to renegotiate its contracts with housing companies to allow the service to withhold all incentive fees from low-performing landlords. Been accused of having an unrelenting bias against Mark Zuckerberg, and I just have to express to people how true that is, because, I mean, who wouldn't? I hate the little snot. Jeez, give me a break. I mean, if you'd like it's one thing to drop out of college and make $1 billion. But it's another to drop out of college, make $1 billion, and never have taken a humanities class that you took seriously. Okay? I mean, let's be clear. This offering here, finishing up in the Bistro Cafe at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays, is by anonymous worker bees at the Agence France Presse. A scathing British parliamentary report yesterday, that would be Monday, branded Facebook as digital gangsters that knowingly violated data privacy and competition laws. Lawmakers' 18-month investigation into disinformation and fake news also accused Facebook of failing to faithfully fight Russia's alleged attempts to influence elections. Well, there's money to be made, and if you're a war profiteer, which apparently Facebook is now, you make money during war. That's what war profiteering is all about. Jeez. Well, apparently in Great Britain, they frown upon that behavior. Cultural Select Committee Chair Damian Collins said Facebook deliberately sought to frustrate our work by giving incomplete, disingenuous, and at times misleading answers to our questions. Well, Mr. Cultural Select Committee Chair Damian Collins, welcome to America. Oh, wait a second. We're in your court of law? Well, we're Americans. Come on. Facebook co-founder and chief Mark Zuckerberg turned down 3 requests to appear before the committee because he was afraid he was going to be taken right off the docket, right into jail. Reading Gale. Companies like Facebook should not be allowed to behave like digital gangsters in the online world, considering themselves to be ahead of and beyond the law, the report said. Social media companies cannot hide behind the claim of being merely a platform and maintain that they have no responsibility themselves in regulating content of their sites. The committee urged a compulsory code of ethics for all tech companies that would be overseen by an independent regulator. It said that Facebook should be obliged to take down sources of harmful content and disinformation. We further recommend that the government launches an independent investigation into past elections, including the UK election of 2017, the UK referendum of 2016, and the Scottish referendum of 2014 to explore what actually happened with regard to foreign influence, the report said. You can read it without the accent, but it's really much more fun when you do. British media quoted a response from Facebook saying it shared the committee's concerns about fake news and election integrity. Snicker, snicker. We are open to meaningful regulation and support the committee's recommendation for electoral law reform, the company was quoted as saying, but it added, no other channel for political advertising is as transparent and offers the tools that we do. Yeah. Tools to destroy governments, especially democracies. Well, it's now time for our break, so let's do that. And when we come back from said break, we will go through weather from around the world and finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. This week, Last Laugh. Stan and Ollie is less of a buddy movie than a tender-hearted romance of two friends near the end of their lives and once glorious careers. Based on the real-life comedy power duo Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy, Stan and Ollie is a portrait of the two performers well after their reign as kings of the box office. Set in the 1950s, Stan and Ollie have reluctantly agreed to tour the UK and Ireland in order to fund a comeback movie, namely a version of Robin Hood written by the former. However, nothing is certain, and as the tour begins, the movie hasn't been green-lighted for production. In addition to funding issues, Ollie, played by a brilliant John C. Reilly, is having health problems and wonders if he's physically up for the role. Stan, played by Steve Coogan, in what should have been a nominated performance, is still optimistic that the film will proceed and believes that the duo still has at least one hurrah to come. While there are some laughs here, Stan and Ollie makes no bones that it is, at its heart, a drama. It is also a portrait of a marriage, specifically the professional showbiz partnership of Laurel and Hardy, and all the tension and frustration that develop over the decades, as well as the very real marriages of the two entertainers to two strong, albeit very different women. In particular, Shirley Henderson shines as Ollie's wife Lucille, whose love and tender devotion to him provides some of the film's gentler moments. Likewise, Nina Arianda is hilarious as Ollie's outspoken Russian-born wife, Ida. Watching her and Henderson play off each other is truly a delight. All in all, Stan and Ollie is a wonderful, understated gem of a movie, even if your parents weren't born when the pair embarked on their final tour. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and feed us back on our page on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Karen Hopkin. Believe it or not, mosquitoes don't bite out of spite. Female mosquitoes of the species Aedes aegypti need the nutrients present in your plasma to ensure the proper development of their eggs. And though their thirst may seem unquenchable, the ladies actually take time to savor your blood once they've sipped their fill.
After a female bites, she'll double her body weight, and then she'll actually completely lose interest in biting people for several days.
Laura Duvall, a postdoctoral researcher at the Rockefeller University in New York City. The insect's postprandial recovery phase made Duvall and her colleagues wonder whether they could essentially trick mosquitoes into thinking they'd already eaten. Duvall works in the lab of Leslie Vosshall, who studies genetics, neuroscience, and behavior. Here's Vosshall.
Our idea was that maybe the same drugs that would turn off human appetite might actually work to turn off mosquito appetite.
Turns out that when the Rockefeller researchers fed mosquitoes a drug that's used to treat people for obesity, the insects were indeed less interested in hunting for their next human meal ticket.
But the problem was that we needed to figure out how the human diet drugs were actually working in the mosquito.
So they isolated the receptor protein with which these diet drugs interact. The receptor, which they dubbed NPY-LR7, looks a lot like the receptors that regulate hunger in people. The researchers knew they had the right receptor because when they knocked it out in some mosquitoes, the drugs no longer dampened the insect's appetite, a finding they describe in the journal Cell. In fact, the mutant mosquitoes were all around insatiable.
So the NPY-LR7 mutants behave really strangely. Even after they take a huge blood meal, they remain thirsty for human blood.
Next, Duvall says they'd like to explore exactly how these drugs act to curb a female's bloodlust.
Does she become less sensitive to the clues that tell her that a human is nearby? Or is this more like smelling a hamburger after you've already eaten 3?
Either way, the approach could provide a novel method to limit the spread of diseases that are transmitted by mosquito bite, like dengue and yellow fever, and give us a new way to tell mosquitoes to buzz off. Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Karen Hopkin.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. And it doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. And you'll get a wondiferous pair of Netroots radio stickers for application to your backpack, your bumper sticker, or your banjo. Well, it's up to you which backpack you want to put it on. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage. Because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
Jews, Catholics, Muslims, Buddhists need not apply.
I'm children's book author Jane Yolen, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute with ACLU attorney Bill Newman.
Actually, all non-Protestants need not apply. To be foster or adoptive parents in parts of South Carolina and in many other places across America if the Trump administration has its way. Trump's Department of Health and Human Services recently granted South Carolina's request for an exception to the federal rule that bars discrimination in federally funded child welfare programs. South Carolina's request was prompted by an agency called Miracle Hill, which will place children only with Protestant Christian families. Get this, there are no other general foster care agencies in that area of the state. Technically, it's private, but it functions as part of the state government. And if the Trump administration grants more waivers from the anti-discrimination requirement, the over 440,000 children in the public child welfare system and the more than 100,000 kids awaiting adoption will now be less likely to find foster and adoptive parents to love and care and nurture them. So, there's a new policy that overtly hurts children while it thrusts a battering ram into the wall of separation between church and state.
The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because our children's freedom can't protect itself.
The Koch brothers believe that their great wealth entitles them to rule over the many. So, for decades, they've been running a surreptitious assault on the rules that protect the majority of us from their abuse. From whacking our voting rights to busting unions, their plutocratic intent is nothing less than to pull a coup on democracy, installing a government of, by, and for the super-rich. They've enlisted a secretive cadre of other billionaires who share their extreme kleptocratic belief that 1, property rights of the rich are more important than the people's political rights. 2, that majority rule is not a good form of governing. And 3, that the makers, as the billionaires dubbed themselves, should be able to overrule collective actions of the lower classes, whom they call takers. They've created a complex, sophisticated web of right-wing front groups that have already corporatized a slew of our most basic laws and institutions. And they've gained a chokehold on nearly every level of government, including our courts and whole states like Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Texas. To carry out their attacks, they've essentially taken over the Republican Party. Even more shocking than the arrogance of this unprecedented power grab by the conspiracy of billionaires is its quiet success. The Koch coup crept up on us because it abhorred publicity and couched each move as an independent effort by a separate group. Then, the conspirators backed the Supreme Court's outrageous 2010 Citizens United decision, decreeing that unlimited corporate spending is allowed because it's, quote, free speech. Only then did Americans begin waking up to the reality that the Kochs were making an assault on democracy itself. This is Jim Hightower saying, to learn more, check out the extensive Koch web files at the Center for Media and Democracy at exposedbycmd.org/Koch.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
I read the news today, oh boy.
It's time for Nicole Sandler's What's News from NicoleSandler.com and the Progressive Voices Network.
The court battle against Donald Trump's national emergency declaration has started. 16 states filed a lawsuit against the declaration in federal court in the Northern District of California. Attorneys general from Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, Hawaii, Illinois, Maine, Maryland, Michigan, Minnesota, Nevada, New Jersey, New Mexico, New York, Oregon, and Virginia joined California in the legal action. California's Attorney General Javier Becerra broke the news on CNN.
15 states have now joined California in the suit. Do you expect more states to join as well?
I suspect so, and I wouldn't be surprised if some states file on their own because I think everyone is concerned when you hear that $8 billion of money that you were expecting to come for other important programs is now going to be raided by the president to pay for a border wall, which Congress specifically decided not to fund at the level the president wants. I think every state should be worried.
I want to play something that Senator Lindsey Graham said yesterday about where the president could get some of the money for the wall.
Let's just say for a moment that he took some money out of the military construction budget. I would say it's better for the middle school kids in Kentucky to have a secure border. We'll get them the school they need, but right now we got a national emergency on our hands.
I'm wondering, do you agree with Senator Graham's justification there?
I don't think I understand what Senator Graham is talking about. The kids in Kentucky who aren't getting as good an education as they might otherwise are going to suffer for a long time because Donald Trump's going to spend years and tens of billions of dollars, not just $8 billion, trying to build a border wall. And so I'm not sure I could not only not agree with Senator Graham, but I don't think I understand what Senator Graham's talking about.
The president declared a national emergency last week on the U.S.-Mexico border in an attempt to build a border wall, even though he failed to secure funding for it in Congress. Critics call it an unconstitutional end run around the legislative branch. In an odd moment during an incredibly weird Rose Garden event Friday, at which Donald Trump invoked a national emergency to get his stupid wall, he also told the world that Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe had nominated him for a Nobel Peace Prize.
Prime Minister Abe of Japan gave me the most beautiful copy of a letter that he sent to the people who give out a thing called the Nobel Prize. He said, I have nominated you, or respectfully on behalf of Japan, I am asking them to give you the Nobel Peace Prize. I said, thank you. Many other people feel that way too. I'll probably never get it, but that's okay. They gave it to Obama. He didn't even know what he got it for. He was there for about 15 seconds and he got the Nobel Prize. He said, oh, what did I get it for? With me, I probably will never get it. But if you look at Idlib province in Syria, I stopped the slaughter of perhaps 3 million people. Nobody talk about that. They don't talk about that. Russia and Iran and Syria were going to go in and perhaps destroy 3 million people in order to get 45,000 terrorists. And I heard about it from a woman who had her parents and her brothers living there, and she said, please, please. And I thought, no, it can't happen. What are you talking about? No, they're going to get... And I come home and I read a certain paper where the story was there that they were actually forming to go into, to really do big destruction. And I put out a statement that you better not do it.
The Asahi newspaper of Japan reported on Sunday that the Trump White House actually asked Japanese Prime Minister Abe to nominate Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize. Former acting FBI Director Andrew McCabe's book, The Threat, is now out. He's making the media rounds after first appearing on 60 Minutes Sunday night, in which he let loose a few bombshells, including a story about Trump agreeing with Vladimir Putin over his intelligence community regarding North Korea's military capabilities.
Essentially, the president said he did not believe that the North Koreans had the capability to hit us here with ballistic missiles in the United States because President Putin had told him they did not.
And U.S. intelligence was telling the president what?
Intelligence officials in the briefing responded that that was not consistent with any of the intelligence our government possesses, to which the president replied, I don't care. I believe Putin.
Meanwhile, Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein is planning to leave the Department of Justice sometime next month. Rosenstein had long maintained that he'd step down once a new Attorney General was confirmed. The silence heard round the world. Mike Pence gave a speech at the John McCain Awards ceremony at Munich's security conference, and after saying a line mentioning greetings from Donald Trump, he clearly expected a round of applause. Instead, this happened.
I bring greetings from the 45th President of the United States of America, President Donald Trump. Last August, I reflected on the words that are in the old book.
Sad. He's in. Senator Bernie Sanders appeared Tuesday morning on Vermont Public Radio to make it official.
I think what a president has got to do is bring our people together and not divide us up. And that's certainly one reason I'm running. And the second reason is we began the political revolution in the 2016 campaign, and now it's time to move that revolution forward and make sure that that vision, those ideas are implemented into policy.
And that's a bit of what's news for now. I'm Nicole Sandler. If you appreciate these reports and the Nicole Sandler Show, I hope you'll consider making a contribution. My work is 100% listener supported, and I can't do it without your help. Find out more at NicoleSandler.com/donate.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays, and it's a warming chowder on a very chilly day across America. And I'm not talking about the national emergency. I'm talking about the weather, let alone the climate. My God. Well, we are currently under a winter storm warning here along the banks of the Rogue River and the Rogue River Valley of southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America. That will be coming into effect, actually officially, in about an hour, and will go through, what is it today? Tuesday? It's going to go through until Thursday. Right now we're partly cloudy, winds are light and variable out of the northeast, and we are right now registering in at 19 degrees Fahrenheit, and our high should top out today about 42 to 44 degrees, with overnight lows, well, they're saying in the upper 20s to low 30s. It could be more like the mid-20s is what I presume. In a couple of hours, the winds will shift out of the west-northwest and increase to 5 to 10 miles per hour, bringing on an ever-scant chance of rain, which will then increase as we get to the evening times, and the winds will then have shifted out of the west-southwest, continuing at 5 to 10 miles per hour And we're expecting to get, just a little under 1/4 of an inch of rain and snow overnight. And then tomorrow we are expecting a snowy mix, a wintry mix, with about 1/4 inch of maybe rain. And they're also saying that it could be actually more than 1.5 inches of snow. So we'll see how that goes. Maybe, maybe not. Though we do have snow in the offering here in the next 10 days with rain mixed in. Wow. Looking like it's going to be about 2 inches of snow for a few days each day. Maybe it'll get melted off by the almost 1/4 of an inch of rain that they're expecting as well. We will see, won't we? All right. Weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property. And these people positively live around the world. And they do. London is 53 and partly cloudy. Paris is 52 and partly cloudy. Rome is 54 and partly cloudy. Kiev is 37 degrees and fair. Kabul is 30 degrees with light snow. Hong Kong is 68 and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 47 and mostly cloudy with a weather advisory. I bet it's dry air, even though there's clouds in the air, and a dense fog advisory. I wouldn't be driving around in the Ginza because you can't. You can basically only walk. And even then, it's hard to get around when it's foggy, so take care there in Tokyo. Sydney, Australia is 69 degrees with a rain shower. San Francisco, California is 40 degrees and sunny. And New York is 28 degrees Fahrenheit and fair. And that is Weather from Around the World, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property. And these people positively live around the world. Sarah Ann Lynch of Reuters brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. It not only warms the soul, it really warms up the whole body, too. You need that kind of starch on a cold day like this. You do! The U.S. auto industry urged Donald Trump's administration not to saddle imported cars and auto parts with steep tariffs after the U.S. Commerce Department sent a confidential report to the White House late on Sunday with its recommendations for how to proceed. Some trade organizations also blasted the Commerce Department for keeping the details of its Section 232 National Security Report shrouded in secrecy. Wilbur, what are you doing? Which will make it much harder for the industry to react. During the next 90 days, Trump will have to review it. Well, of course, because he's listening to Putin. Who is he? I know Wilbur is in the mix here, but we're talking about Trump. Putin said, don't let them know. Let them give them time to react. Don't you know what a powerhouse your economy is? My economy is barely that of Italy's. And their government changes all the time, and their economy is just shit. Damn it. Don't let them know. I need him brought down a notch or two. Come on, we got wheat futures here too, buddy. Secrecy around the report only increases with the uncertainty and concern across the industry created by the threat of tariffs. The Motor and Equipment Manufacturers Association said in a statement, adding that it was alarmed and dismayed. Strong words coming from the captains of industry, don't you think? It is critical that our industry have the opportunity to review the recommendations and advise the White House on how proposed tariffs, if they are recommended, will put jobs at risk, impact consumers, and trigger a reduction in U.S. investments that could set us back decades. And the White House snickered and said, of course, that's exactly the plan, dummy. Do you think we got in here by subterfuge on accident? The industry also warned that possible tariffs of up to 25% on millions of imported cars and parts would add thousands of dollars to vehicle costs and potentially devastate the U.S. economy by slashing jobs. And the White House is just, and Trump in particular, he and Lavrov are jumping around, dancing the Russian sword dance, rubbing their hands with glee. At least in my movie trading places. Now, some Republican lawmakers have also said they share the industry's concerns. In a statement issued yesterday, that would be Monday, Republican Congresswoman Jackie Walorski said she fears the Commerce Department's report could set the stage for costly tariffs on cars and auto parts. Trump is right to seek a level playing field for American businesses and workers, she said, but the best way to do that is with a scalpel, not an axe.
Je te donne, c'est mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers, c'est tout.
Ishmael Lopez of Reuters brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A farm leader who helped lead protests last year against President Daniel Ortega was sentenced yesterday to 216 years in prison, days after business leaders asked the government to release inmates considered political prisoners. Well, you know, when there's a vacuum, you got to fill it, right? A judge sentenced Medardo Marena after he was convicted last December of terrorism, murder, and organized crime, charges he denied. Before he was arrested last July, he was among the opposition members who participated in the failed dialogue with the government. More than 320 people died in the protests last year against Ortega after government supporters and police opened fire on crowds. Street rallies have since tapered off, and the government has clamped down on opposition media and organizations seen as supporting the protests. Wow, I wonder if the White House is looking at this going, wish we could be the Sandinistas. Oh, wait a second, we are. Over the weekend, the government and business groups met in an attempt to restart talks to end the crisis that has severely damaged the poor Central American country's economy. The business groups demanded the release of more than 600 people they consider to be political prisoners. Marena is a leader of a movement opposed to a stalled Chinese-backed project to build a waterway connecting the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans, rivaling the Panama Canal. Oh, that's why. Despite the sentence, the country's constitution establishes that no Nicaraguan can spend more than 30 years in prison. Oh, really? Well, what's a simple thing like a constitution is just a quaint piece of paper, isn't it now? Judge Edgar Altamirano ruled that Marena was the mastermind of the murders of 5 policemen who died during a protest in a municipality of the south of the country and the kidnapping of 2 other officers. Several organizations, including the UN, have criticized the excessive use of force to control the protests and blame the Ortega government for most of the reported deaths. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day. But you know Networks Radio is going to broadcast on. So we'll meet up tomorrow for Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. And do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here tomorrow in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.